when you're taking a house apart and leaving all of the charm and the old house architecture and detail, like there's so much there, and then you're able to make it perform like a brand new home, probably one of my favorite types of renovations. What's up, guys? It is episode 20. Real quick, Power Pro sent us a bunch of screws, structural screws, exterior trim screws, looks like some machine screws, cabinet screws. Gonna get these out to the field and get these guys trying these out, compare it to what we've been using in the past. So we'll try those out. If you guys have anything that you'd love to send to us, we'll actually include the address below, and maybe not, but if it's something cool, maybe we'll open it up on a future coffee break. Last week we talked about 3 reasons why you would build instead of renovate. This week I want to talk about why you would renovate instead of build. There's a couple reasons, and let's talk about the first one. Oftentimes you see, if we're talking about renovate versus build, there's obviously a new home that's involved. An old home that's involved. And the question is, do we tear it down or do we not tear it down? One of the leading reasons why you don't tear it down is because of permitting or zoning or the town ordinances. We work in a lot of towns that if you want to tear down your home, it has to meet a certain criteria that would allow that. And it's like the town basically doesn't care about the house. Maybe it's an old house or it's dilapidated or it's just not architecturally pleasing. The majority of these homes actually do require this holding time. Oftentimes it's 12 months. And that's a mandatory 12 months. You can do all the paperwork, but it's going to be 12 months. You have to own that house. So if you're renting or if you own something else, you're carrying a mortgage for 12 months before you're able to actually rip that down. It could be longer than that, especially when we get into, historic neighborhoods and things like that, or it's a prominent piece of architecture in these towns. So that's one of the reasons why you might renovate is that, I don't want to wait 12, 18, 24 months to go through the approval process to rip it down. Let's just renovate what we have. And obviously you're going to still go through red tape and make sure that you're not renovating too much, or you're not renovating it with the intent to actually build something. There's still red tape, but that process typically is sped up. Now, zoning is the same thing. The house, maybe the house was built 100 years ago and it's on a lot that the FAR is floor area ratio, so the size of the lot compared to the size of the home. Maybe the house is too big for the lot in today's zoning laws. Well, that's where you go for a variance. So you would go to the town and apply for a variance saying, hey, we want to build this house. It's, one of the variances would be that it's actually too big for the lot that we're planning on building on, but maybe that's fine. And, that approval process is just part of, anytime you're going against anything that's within the zoning. But having an existing home that is too large, well, it's already grandfathered in, so you're not messing around with trying to get something through zoning, and you're renovating that house instead of building something new. So that's another thing, another reason why you might renovate. It's basically what, all these rules and regulations of what you can build, you're grandfathered in with this old house. Why not work with that house and renovate it? Historic's another one, and I want to tie historic into the reason number 2. Maybe it's historic, maybe it's a family house, maybe there's, a connection to the house, and you don't want to lose the charm of it. Maybe there's just charm, and that's why you bought it. It's an old house, and it has character, and for you to rip it down and build something new, you're going to lose a lot of that. So that's a great reason why you would leave it. And, what we see trending a lot is, people buy these old homes and they basically strip them down, and, the outside is restored or replicated or fixed up to, appear as though it was built 100, 200 years ago. But when you walk inside, it's this modern home. And I think that's probably one of my favorite types of renovations. When you're taking a house apart and leaving all of the charm and the old house, architecture and detail, like there's so much there, and then you're able to make it perform like a brand new home. Take our Newton project, for example. The house is nearly 100 years old, and we took that and we essentially stripped it down to nothing, renovated the entire inside. We put an addition on as well, but we renovated the entire inside of the home, but left the aesthetic of what was in the 1930s, and we were able to beef it up to be able to perform like a home built today. We got it down to, a 1.2 ACH or something like that. But a really tight house in an otherwise what was a really leaky house before that. And that's, it's challenging, but that was part of, the charm of it. It was, they really liked the main part of the house, and, we could have ripped it down, and maybe there was financial, consideration there as to, maybe it would make more sense, or maybe we would have ran into zoning issues because it might have been too close to the lot line, or whatever the case is, that we were able to leave the charm, and that's what they bought that house for, and build upon that. Same thing if it's a family home, and you don't want to rip it down. It's the same thing. You want to maintain that charm. Number 3 is going to be wastefulness. And this is probably anytime you see someone crunching up a house. I know Johnny gets it a lot on his Instagram, but when he's crunching up a house to build a new house on, there's oftentimes this mentality about wastefulness. And it's a valid concern in a lot of ways, but, and John does a good job kind of navigating that, because he talks about how the house just doesn't work for today's living. And that's oftentimes the case. And, there probably was a consideration of whether it could be renovated or not, only to realize that, it doesn't work. The ceilings are short, the rooms are tight. It's just going to cost too much time and money to make it work. So let's get into the wastefulness side of it. The wastefulness side of it, well, that can be mitigated. And, what we do on any project, and what I encourage our project managers and assistant project managers to do, is find a home for as much of the stuff that we're getting rid of as possible. It's really easy to just say, demo guys go in, get everything out of here, strip it down, appliances go in the trash, cabinets go in the trash. Yeah, furniture goes in, everything goes in the trash and ends up in a landfill or a recycling center or wherever it might be. But if you take a second and, maybe dedicate a day or a couple of days to figuring out what's in the house, what can be salvaged? Can we donate all the cabinetry and the appliances? Can we donate plumbing fixtures? Can we donate, whatever we can donate or even salvage, or maybe we offer it up to our team. We go through that process of, okay, no, none of the donation centers will take this. Well, maybe we send out a company email. Hey guys, we got this extra dishwasher, on this project. It's going to, we don't want it to go in the trash. Is anyone interested in it? It's an exact example. I end up taking this dishwasher because my mother had called me the night before asking me, the best place to buy a dishwasher. The dishwasher was nearly new, still had the stickers on it. So it worked out. And, we try to find a place for all this stuff. And I think from a wastefulness standpoint, it's a valid concern, but if we do our best to mitigate that wastefulness and not just be irresponsible with it and try to do our best about repurposing this stuff, it really makes a big difference. Building material, it's hard, especially homes that were built within the last 100 years. A lot of that stuff isn't salvageable. A lot of materials and paints and asbestos and stuff like that, is kind of soaked into a lot of this lumber. Even the lumber at that case, maybe over 100 years old. I remember my house, there was a lot of lumber we were able to strip out and reuse, build furniture for it. That's an option. I think about, we built some mudroom cabinetry in my house, and we actually repurposed all of the old floor joists. And they were old growth pine, and it came out awesome, and we were able to repurpose that. So, the wastefulness can be mitigated. There's a cost to that, though. So this is, it's hard to say what's more expensive, building or renovating, but I tend to say renovating is more expensive, especially if you want to dissect it by square foot, or, just the overall consideration of what parts and pieces go into it. And I think that's what ends up leading people to just tearing it down, because it's just going to be cheaper to tear something down and rebuild it than it is to undo everything. But this isn't about that. This is strictly about, renovating versus building, and why you would renovate versus build. So it really comes down to the permitting and zoning, and really the stipulations behind town ordinances, and then it comes down to the I keep losing my words, Doug. Charm. The overall charm of the home is number 2, and then number 3 is just wastefulness. So what it really comes down to is, what you're the town ordinances and what they're going to control, whether it's permitting or zoning, or going to put a delay on tearing something down. So renovating makes more sense. Or maybe it's the charm, it's a family home or a historic home, and you really like the old home and you want to improve upon that, then keep it, renovate it, and make the inside great. And because you can bring those up to today's standards. Or the last part is the wastefulness. Ripping a house down, you're wasting a ton of material rather than renovating it. The other side of this, and one of you guys had asked in our previous video, is about, well, it's better to renovate because the builders in town are building, an inferior product. And that, I feel like this goes down a totally different path because, we're talking about building for spec versus maybe custom. And, and I don't want to separate that, saying spec is bad, custom is better, but the building for spec, you're building a product for sale that you have to appeal to the masses. Where building custom, you're building a home catered to someone. So the spec might tend to feel as though it doesn't have as much detail, and that really might be the case because, well, you have to appeal to a lot more people. And I think that's probably the general consensus. But, there's a ton of guys that build for spec, for sale, that do tend to, waver away from that and try to, curate their market a little bit tighter into more of a custom product, which is great. Again, I'm going to reference back to John. Like John, he gets he builds some for spec and he puts a lot more spin on what he's doing and detail. So, I can't compare to the guys building inferior products because that just comes down to picking a right builder. And if you guys want more information on that, there's a previous coffee break. We talk all about that. But either way, we'll see you guys next week. Appreciate you watching. Oh, and if you guys have questions, make sure you drop them in the comments below. Thanks, Doug.